He controls half of Seoul, but he cannot control this one thing. A girl in a lavender dress sits in a wheelchair at the center of a garden worth millions. Her hands are folded in her lap. Her eyes are fixed on nothing. The silence around her is the kind that money builds and cannot break. His name is Kang-min. In Seoul, they call him the Dragon. Not because he breathes fire, but because everything he touches either bows or burns. He built his empire brick by cold brick, closed oil contracts in Busan, and owned real estate from Gangnam to Incheon. City officials returned his calls before their own families. Hwang Gume's son, the Golden Hand. That was his name in every boardroom that mattered. But behind those walls, behind the cameras and the marble, and the guards who never blinked, there was one room he could not walk into without his chest collapsing. Ha-rin's room, his daughter, 11 years old with a laugh that once filled every corner of the mansion. She used to run to the gate when he came home. She used to sing while she ate breakfast. That was before the accident. He flew her to Germany, then the United States, then a specialist in Tokyo who charged more per hour than most people earn in a year. Every doctor said her body could heal, but something deeper was not healing. Ha-rin had gone somewhere inside herself that no scalpel could reach. She stopped talking. She stopped eating her favorite foods. She stopped looking out the window. Not because the world was gone, but because she no longer cared that it was there. For the first time in his life, Kang-min had no move left to make. Then, a rustle in the hedge, a pair of bright eyes, a flash of olive green, bare feet landing silently on the stone path. His name is Aid. He is 12 years old, his collar is frayed, his knees are torn through, and he has just walked through $1 million security system, using nothing but instinct and a gap in the bushes that no adult ever thought to check. He looks at Ha-rin the way only a child who has survived on the streets knows how to look at someone, like he sees what everyone else decided to stop seeing. And then he does the only thing he knows how to do. He dances, not for money, not for applause, not because anyone asked him to. He throws in a ridiculous shoulder shimmy and a face so outrageously silly it belongs in a cartoon. Ha-rin's eyes shift. Her lip twitches, and then something happens that 14 months of silence had made everyone forget was even possible. She laughs, full, loud, completely uncontrollable. The birds scatter from the garden wall. From behind a marble column, a figure in a perfectly tailored black suit goes completely still. Kang-min had not heard that sound in over a year, and a barefoot stranger, a child with no invitation, no credentials, and nothing to his name, had pulled it out of her in under 60 seconds. Every instinct in him says remove the intruder. His jaw is tight. His fists are slow to unclench. But Ha-rin is still laughing. Ha-rin just laughed for the first time in over a year, and the most dangerous man in Seoul is standing there, not knowing what to do next. If there's anyone who has ever had someone completely unexpected walk into their life and change everything, they already know where this story's going. The best part hasn't even started yet, and the people already subscribed won't miss a single second of it. As for those who haven't yet, well, Ha-rin is watching from her wheelchair, and somehow she doesn't look like she's in the mood to be patient. Kang-min did not become the Dragon of Seoul by accident. He became it the way all truly dangerous men do, quietly, methodically, and without ever letting anyone see the cost. By the time he was 34, he had restructured 3 failing conglomerates, absorbed 2 rival networks without a single public confrontation, and earned a reputation so clean on paper and so understood in private that no one in the city dared say his name carelessly. His office on the 42nd floor of the Lawson Tower had floor-to-ceiling glass on all 4 sides. He liked it that way. He liked being seen. He liked the reminder that from up there, everything below was manageable. Everything had a pattern. Everything could be controlled. Everything except the silence on the 2nd floor of his own home. Ha-rin's room faced the garden. It always had. She had chosen it herself at age 6 because she wanted to watch the roses from her bed in the morning. Now the curtains were drawn by noon because the sunlight made her head hurt. The dance trophies on her shelf collected a fine layer of dust that the housekeeper was instructed never to touch, because the one time she had moved them to clean, Ha-rin had noticed immediately and said nothing, just turned her face to the wall and did not eat dinner. The framed drawing still hung above her desk. A crayon girl holding a tall man's hand. Two figures in a garden, underneath it in uneven letters. Abarang na. Daddy and me. Kang-min walked past that room every morning at 6:15 on his way to the east staircase. He never slowed down. He had learned, in the way that men who can't afford to break learn things, that the fastest route past unbearable things is straight through them without stopping. But every single morning, in the half-second it took to pass that door, something behind his ribs would tighten like a fist closing. And he would carry that tightness all the way to his car, all the way to his office, all the way through meetings with men who feared him. And he would set it down somewhere, no one could see it, and he would work. That was his life. That was the throne he had built. Magnificent, untouchable, and completely hollow at the center. 3 kilometers from the mansion, on the far edge of Mapo district, where the bus depot hummed and the street food carts opened before the sun did, there was a boy who had turned survival into something close to philosophy. Aid had been navigating Seoul since he was 9. His mother, a Nigerian-born seamstress who had come to Korea on a work visa and stayed for love, had raised him in a one-room apartment above a dry cleaning shop until the dry cleaning shop closed and the apartment went with it. She was not gone. She worked double shifts at a textile factory in Yangchon, but she was rarely present in the way that presence counts. And so Aid had learned to fill the hours with the one thing that cost nothing and gave everything back. Movement. Rhythm. The language his body spoke better than Korean or Yoruba or any combination of the two. He was not performing for money, though money came when it came. A folded bill from a woman waiting for the 571 bus, a handful of coins from the construction workers who ate lunch on the low wall by the depot and clapped in time without knowing why. He danced because it was the only moment the city stopped being something that happened to him and started being something he happened to. When he moved, he was not the boy with the too loud laughter in a classroom that did not know what to do with him. He was not the kid whose uniform was always a season behind. He was not half of anything. He was entirely, completely himself. And he was, in ways that would only become clear later, paying close attention to everything around him. He had noticed the mansion on Bukhansan Row 6 weeks earlier, not because of its size — big houses were everywhere in that neighborhood — but because of the girl. He had been cutting through the service alley behind the hedgerow when he heard it. Wheels on stone, slow and rhythmic, and then nothing. He had stood on his toes and looked through a gap in the iron-framed hedge and saw Ha-rin being pushed by her nanny into the garden, positioned in a patch of afternoon sun, and then left alone while the nanny went inside. Ha-rin had sat there for 40 minutes without moving, without looking up, without doing a single thing that children do when they are left alone in a garden. Aid had watched her the way he watched everything, with the full, unfiltered attention of someone who had learned that the world only reveals its secrets to people willing to look directly at it. And what he saw in Ha-rin was not illness. It was not a weakness. It was grief wearing the costume of stillness. He recognized it because he had worn it himself, briefly, after the apartment and before the bus park. That particular kind of sadness that doesn't announce itself. It just quietly turns off the lights, one by one, until you're sitting in the dark, wondering why everything feels so far away. He came back the next afternoon, and the one after that. He studied the security rotation with the same focused intelligence he used to memorize bus schedules and market rhythms. 2 guards at the front gate, switching at 3 and 7. 1 patrol along the east wall, none along the hedgerow at the back because the hedge itself was considered sufficient. The gap he had found, low, half hidden by an overgrown root, had clearly never been discovered by anyone who was looking for it, because adults, Aid had long since concluded, almost never looked down. On the 6th afternoon, he went through. He landed silently on the garden path, bare feet reading the temperature of the stone the way other children read textbooks. Ha-rin was exactly where he expected her to be, parked in the center of the garden, the nanny's shadow visible through the kitchen window. He had maybe 12 minutes before the next rotation. He looked at the girl in the wheelchair. She had not seen him yet. Her eyes were doing that thing they always did, open but absent, aimed at a fixed point in the middle distance that only she could locate. Aid tilted his head. Then slowly, Deliberately, he walked into her line of sight. Ha-rin blinked, her eyes focused. She looked at him the way you look at something that should not exist. Not with fear, but with the quiet confusion of someone whose world had become so predictable that anything outside the pattern registered as almost dreamlike. A boy, barefoot, in her garden, looking at her with an expression she could not quite classify. Aid did not speak. He had not planned to speak. Instead, he planted his feet, rolled his shoulders back, and with the absolute commitment of someone who has never once been embarrassed by joy, he began to move. It was not elegant. That was the point. He found the most ridiculous version of every move. Hips 3 counts behind the beat he was clearly hearing only in his own head. Arms doing something that belonged in a different dance entirely. Eyebrows raised so high they nearly left his face. He spun on one heel and nearly fell, caught himself, and made the near fall part of the routine with the smooth confidence of someone who understood that the line between stumbling and performing was entirely a matter of commitment. Ha-rin stared. Adi escalated. He added a sound effect, a completely unnecessary, deeply committed vocal percussion that had no business being as loud as it was in a garden this quiet. The corner of Ha-rin's mouth moved. Almost nothing. A tremor, really. The kind of movement a face makes when it has forgotten it knows how. Ade saw it. He locked eyes with her and doubled down, launching into a full shoulder isolation sequence that looked like his upper body was having a private argument with the rest of him. He crossed his eyes for exactly 1 second, then uncrossed them with theatrical dignity as though nothing had happened. Ha-rin broke. The laugh came out of her like something that had been sealed under pressure. Sudden, full, completely unladylike, and absolutely unstoppable. She clapped both hands over her mouth, but it made no difference. The sound filled the garden. The birds on the wall scattered in a single startled mass. Her shoulders shook. Her eyes, those quiet, distant eyes, were bright and wet and present in a way they had not been in over a year. Ade grinned. Not the grin of someone who had done something clever, the grin of someone who had simply told the truth and been believed. If this moment hit you the way it hit everyone standing in that garden, stay right here, because what happens in the next 60 seconds changes everything. Kang-min had come home early. He did not do this often. Early arrivals meant unstructured time, and unstructured time in that house meant eventually standing outside Ha-rin's door, which meant the fist behind his ribs, which meant a level of exposure he had not built his entire life to accommodate. But a meeting had ended 40 minutes ahead of schedule, and his driver had already been waiting, and something, he could not name it, would not try, had made him say go home instead of back to the office. He had heard it from the East Quarter, a sound so foreign to the acoustics of his house that for a full 2 seconds his brain had filed it under malfunction. A speaker somewhere, a television left on. Then it came again, and his body understood before his mind did, because his feet were already moving toward the garden door before he had consciously decided to move at all. He stepped out onto the terrace and stopped. Ha-rin was laughing. Ha-rin was laughing so hard that the wheelchair was trembling slightly with the force of it, and she was pointing at a boy in the center of the garden who was currently pretending that his left arm was controlled by a separate, malfunctioning brain. And the combination of Ha-rin pointing and laughing and the boy's expression of exaggerated offense at his own arm was so completely, specifically ridiculous that for one fraction of a second, Kang-min felt the fist behind his ribs open. Then it closed again. Harder. There was a stranger in his garden. A child, yes, but a stranger. An intruder who had bypassed security he paid a considerable amount of money to maintain, who was now standing 12 meters from his daughter, with no background check, no clearance, no explanation. Every system in him that had kept him alive and powerful and untouchable for over a decade issued the same instruction simultaneously. Remove him. He descended the terrace steps. His footfall was controlled, deliberate, the walk of a man who had ended far more significant situations than this one. Ade saw him coming. The boy's eyes tracked the movement immediately, instincts honed by years of reading spaces and exits. And for a moment the dance stopped. Ade stood very still, calculating, but he did not run. Kang-min stopped 3 meters away. He looked at the boy, the torn collar, the bare feet, the olive green clothes that had clearly been washed so many times the color had started to negotiate its own exit. He looked at the boy's face, which was doing something remarkable. It was not afraid. Cautious, yes. Respectful of the situation, yes. But not afraid. The eyes were steady, direct, and carrying an intelligence that Kang-min, who had spent his entire career reading people, clocked immediately and could not dismiss. Reading people, clocked immediately and could not dismiss. He opened his mouth to speak, and Ha-rin said, breathless and still half laughing, her voice rusty from disuse but unmistakably, miraculously there. Abba, he's funny. The word hit him like a current. Appa. Dad. She had not called him that in 4 months. She communicated in nods, in small gestures in the direction of her gaze. But that word, his word, in her voice, still warm from laughter. Kang-min looked at his daughter's face, the flush in her cheeks, the light in her eyes, the way she was gripping the armrests of her wheelchair, not in resignation, but in the forward lean of someone who was interested in what happened next. He looked back at the boy. Aid met his gaze without flinching and said quietly, in accent-perfect Korean, with the faintest Nigerian rhythm underneath it, I wasn't stealing anything. I was just dancing. The silence between them was the kind that decides things. Kang-min did not remove him. He stood there for a long moment, the Dragon of Seoul in his garden, looking at a barefoot boy who had just told him the truth without apology. And he made a decision that surprised even himself. He told the housekeeper to bring a chair. Not for Aid, for himself. He sat down 3 meters back, crossed one leg over the other, and said nothing. Just watched. Aid looked at Ha-rin. Ha-rin looked at Odd. And then, with the quiet understanding of two people who have already established their own language, Aid started moving again. That was a Thursday. By the following Monday, Kang-min had spoken to his head of security and carved out a formal arrangement. 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock, every weekday, the garden belonged to Aid. No guards within earshot, no interruptions, just the boy, the girl, and whatever happened between them in that stretch of afternoon light when the roses cast long shadows across the stone path and the city noise faded far enough that you could almost forget it was there. What happened was not therapy, at least not the kind that came with a clipboard and a billing code. Ad arrived each day with no equipment, no plan written down anywhere, and no agenda beyond the one his instincts handed him at the gate. Some days he danced, and Ha-rin watched and laughed. Other days he sat on the ground beside her wheelchair, cross-legged, unbothered, comfortable in his own stillness, the way only people who have spent real time with silence know how to be. And he talked about the bus park, about the woman who sold sundae on the corner and always gave him an extra piece when business was slow, about his mother's hands which smelled like industrial detergent and still managed to braid his hair on Sunday mornings with a gentleness that undid him every time. Ha-rin listened, and then slowly, incrementally, the way a plant grows, invisibly and then all at once, she started to talk back. First it was corrections. Aid had a habit of getting Korean idioms slightly wrong in ways that were technically understandable, but culturally hilarious, and Ha-rin, who had inherited her father's precision, could not let them pass. She would shake her head, mouth twitching, and say the right version. Aid would repeat it with exaggerated seriousness. She would correct his pronunciation. He would overcorrect it into something even more wrong. By the end of the second week, she was giving him full lectures on the proper usage of formal versus informal speech, delivered with the authority of someone who had been academically rigorous since age 7, while Aid sat nodding with his chin in his hand like a philosophy student. It was the most words she had spoken in 14 months. Kang-min watched from the terrace each day, far enough back to be unobtrusive, close enough to hear. He had stopped pretending he was there for any other reason. He brought his evening tea outside now instead of taking it at his desk, and he sat in the same chair each day, and he watched his daughter come back to herself one sentence at a time, and he did not analyze it or try to systematize it or call a doctor to explain the mechanism. He just watched. And every evening, after Aid had gone, and Ha-rin had been helped inside, and the garden had gone quiet again, Kang-min would sit alone for another 10 minutes in that chair and feel something loosening in him. Slowly, reluctantly, like a knot that had been pulled so tight it had forgotten it was ever supposed to come undone. Then came the afternoon everything shifted. It was a Thursday again, 3 weeks into the arrangement. The air had that particular soul heaviness that settles in before rain, warm and close and carrying the distant sound of a high-life melody from somewhere. A shop radio, a passing car, something. Aid had been teaching Ha-rin to use her arms in the dance, guiding her through isolated shoulder movements and wrist rotations, because he had noticed early on that her upper body responded faster than her lower, and he had quietly, methodically been building from there, the way a structural engineer builds from the foundation up. Ha-rin had been getting stronger. Anyone watching closely could see it. The way she held herself in the chair had changed, back straighter, chin up, arms moving with intention rather than simply resting. Her occupational therapist had noted it at the last session, with barely concealed amazement, and increased her exercises accordingly. But the therapist's exercises happened in a clinical room with padded mats and measured progressions. This was different. This was Aid stopping mid-move and looking at Ha-rin with the calm certainty of someone delivering information rather than making a suggestion, and saying, "Your body already knows. You're just not listening to it yet." Ha-rin had looked at him. "The rhythm goes all the way down," he said simply. "You feel it in your shoulders. It doesn't stop there. Let it keep going." She looked down at her legs. The legs that 3 German specialists had described with careful, compassionate language that all meant the same thing. Possible partial recovery, timeline uncertain, do not raise expectations. The legs that had not held her weight in over a year. Aid did not tell her to stand. He would never have done that. He understood instinctively and completely that the difference between a challenge and a command is everything. Instead, he started moving again, slower this time, a rhythm that was almost meditative, and he let the garden fill with the sound of it, the soft percussion of his feet, the low vocal beat he carried under his breath, the high-life echo still drifting from somewhere in the distance. Ha-rin's hands gripped the armrests. From the terrace, Kang-min went completely still. Her knuckles whitened. Her jaw tightened in a way that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with decision. Her hips shifted forward in the seat. Her spine straightened to its full length. And then, with the concentrated effort of someone who had decided, truly, completely, without reservation decided, Ha-rin pushed. Her hips lifted. Her knees straightened. For 3 long seconds that seemed to exist outside of normal time, she stood, fully upright. In her garden, in the afternoon light, with the roses behind her and the city somewhere below, and a barefoot boy watching her with an expression of quiet, complete, unsurprised joy. As if he had always known she would get there, had simply been waiting for her to know it too. Then her knees buckled and she sat back down, breathing hard, eyes bright and wild. Aid crouched in front of her wheelchair, level with her face. 3 seconds today, he said. Next week, 10. Ha-rin laughed. Not the overwhelmed, emotional laugh of someone who cannot believe what just happened, but the sharp, certain laugh of someone who has just been handed a target and already started calculating how to hit it. Behind the marble column, the Dragon of Seoul pressed one hand flat against the stone to steady himself. His other hand was covering his mouth. His eyes were full. If anyone watching this right now has ever seen someone they love find their way back, drop a comment below. Because what Aid just did, no medical degree in the world taught him. He learned it on the streets of Seoul, and it just changed everything. The meeting happened 4 days later. 2 of Kang-min's senior business partners, men who had known him since the early years, who had sat across tables from him through negotiations that would have broken most people, who understood that his reputation was not decoration but architecture, came to the house. They had heard about the boy. In the circles Kang-min moved in, information traveled fast and always arrived with an agenda attached. They sat in the formal dining room, tea untouched, and the elder of the 2 spoke with the measured, careful tone of men who believe they are delivering a kindness. A street child with no documented background, no family verification, no clear origin story. The optics, the vulnerability it created, the questions it would raise among people whose questions were expensive to manage. They were not unkind about it. They were, in their own way, genuinely concerned. For him, for the organization, for the structure of everything he had spent 15 years constructing. Kang-min listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not change his expression. When they finished, he set down his tea, looked at them both, and said, "4 days ago, my daughter stood up for the first time in over a year. That boy is the reason." The silence in the room shifted. "Image," Kang-min said, "is what you build so the world respects you. I spent 15 years building mine. My daughter spent 14 months unable to laugh." He paused. "I know which one I was getting wrong." The elder partner opened his mouth. Kang-min looked at him, not with threat, not with anger, but with the absolute settled clarity of a man who has made a decision from a place so deep that no external argument can reach it. The partner closed his mouth. Both men left 20 minutes later. Kang-min sat alone in the dining room for a while after, and for once the silence in the house felt different. Not heavy, not hollow, but quiet in the way that follows a door finally, properly closing. He went to find Ed. The boy was in the garden after his session, sitting on the low wall near the roses, doing what he always did when he thought no one was watching, feet dangling, eyes moving over the city skyline, with the attentive, curious expression of someone who is perpetually in the process of understanding the world. He heard Kang-min coming and turned, and there was that steadiness again in his eyes, that particular quality of presence that Kang-min had been trying to name for weeks, and had finally identified as something simple. Aid paid attention, full, genuine, unperformed attention. It was, Kang-min realized, the rarest thing he encountered in his daily life. He sat down on the wall beside the boy. Not across from him, beside him. The Dragon of Seoul on a garden wall, next to a 12-year-old with bare feet and a frayed collar, looking out at the same skyline. "Where do you go?" Kang-min asked. "When you leave here?" Aid was quiet for a moment. Then he answered honestly. "The bus park, the service alley, a spot near the depot where the overhang kept the rain off, and the foot traffic was light enough to sleep." He did not dress it up or make it smaller. He stated it the way he stated everything, as fact without performance. Kang-min nodded slowly. He looked at his hands. "Ha-rin has been asking about you," he said, "when you're not here. She asked the housekeeper what you eat for breakfast." He paused. I didn't have an answer. Aid said nothing, but something in his face shifted. Not dramatically, not with the relief of someone who has been rescued, because Aid had never thought of himself as someone waiting to be rescued. It was quieter than that, the look of someone who has been truly, carefully seen, possibly for the first time in a long time. Kang-min turned to him directly. "There is a room on the 3rd floor. It faces the garden, same as Ha-rin's. It has been empty for 2 years. He held the boy's gaze. "I am not offering you a job. I am asking if you would consider becoming part of this family, formally, legally, as my son." The city hummed below them. A bird landed briefly on the rose bush and left again. Aid looked at the skyline for a long moment. Then he looked at Kang-min with those steady, clear eyes and said, in the formal Korean he had been working on for weeks, the version Ha-rin had been drilling into him with great pedagogical seriousness. "I would like that very much. Abeoji." The word, Abeoji, father, landed in Kang-min's chest and stayed there. The paperwork took 11 days. On the 12th, Aid's few belongings. A change of clothes, a cracked phone his mother had given him, a small notebook filled with rhythms he had written down in a private notation only he could read. Moved from a bag by the back steps to a drawer in a room that smelled like fresh linen and faced the garden. The housekeeper put a vase of roses on the desk without being asked. Ha-rin appeared in the doorway 10 minutes after he arrived, looked at the room, looked at him, and said with complete seriousness, "Your pronunciation of Badshim consonants is still terrible. We're fixing that starting tomorrow." Aid looked at her. "Good morning to you, too." She smiled. the full, unheld, completely unguarded smile of a girl who had found her way back to herself and disappeared down the hallway. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning when the light came through the garden at the angle that made everything look like it had been specifically arranged to be beautiful, the three of them walked together along the stone path. Ha-rin on her feet, slowly with Kang-min's arm on one side and Audie's shoulder on the other, each step a small negotiation between intention and gravity. She was not healed. She would have harder days ahead. Days when the progress felt invisible and the distance felt impossible. But she was walking, in her garden, in the morning, with her father on one side and her brother on the other. Kang-min had spent 15 years measuring wealth in floors and contracts and the particular silence of men who respected him. He understood now, with the uncomplicated clarity that only arrives after you have lost something and found it again in a form you did not expect, that none of it had ever made him feel like this, like a man who had everything. The boy from the bus park who had slipped through a gap in the hedge with bare feet and a rhythm in his chest had not just given Ha-rin back her laughter. He had given Kang-min back his home, and that was the thing about joy, real joy, the kind that costs nothing and comes from nowhere and arrives on its own schedule regardless of your security system. You cannot buy it. You cannot build walls around it. You can only make space for it and trust that when it finds a gap, it will come through. Nobody who watched this family walk together that morning, the dragon, his daughter, and the boy who refused to be invisible, could have told you which one of them had given the most. That was the point. That was always the point. The people who stayed until this moment, who watched all the way to the end, already understand what this story was really about. It was never about a mansion or a miracle. It was about what happens when one person decides that another person's joy is worth showing up for. If that moves something in you, subscribe. Because every story on this channel is made with that same belief, that the right story, told with enough care, can make a stranger feel a little less alone.